There was even a national strategy before that. But we clearly found our limits in that strategy. And we engaged with stakeholders to find out how we should shift up a gear, at least, if not two, to capture the digital challenges that were ahead of us. And not only the challenges, I would say most and above all, the digital opportunities. And I think that was a major point of consensus when we spoke to stakeholders, that they all felt, national stakeholders, that we were rather cautious in approaching the new information society and digital world, that we were focusing very much on risks, and that the entire setup that we had was very rigid. Also very focused on silos in a sense, and not really going beyond the borders of the different stakeholder groups. And of course, what did not help, if you will, at the outset was the fact that we came from a rather comfortable point of departure in terms of where we stood as a country, as a society, in terms of the well-being, in terms of the wealth. We have a very good education system, we have good infrastructures, we have a multicultural society with a very, I would say, well-working direct democracy. And so I think people in general can tend to become rather content in such a setup. And I think that was an important point of departure to identify where actually there was potential for us as Switzerland to move on, and more than that, where there were traps that we could fall into if we didn't fully embrace a more comprehensive approach to digitization. And that recognition, I think, led us to the process that ultimately culminated in 2016 in the adoption by the federal government of the strategy, Digital Switzerland. And maybe just to use one phrase that we heard recently at our national conference on Digital Switzerland, to which I will refer to in a minute, we had somebody looking at us from the outside, from Estonia, and I think the question he put to us is, where is your pain point? Where do you find the pain that will make you move in the right direction when it comes to seizing the opportunities and dealing with digitization in the future? So I think that was sort of the ground on which we developed a strategy. It was clear from the outside, I've mentioned that the opportunities had to be center stage. Of course, there are a number of challenges that we are addressing as well, but certainly for a country like Switzerland, which has been also sometimes rather cautious in embracing new, not only technologies, but new phenomena in general, I think that was an important aspect of recognition. And so on that basis, we discussed intensively with stakeholders where we should put our priorities. I mean, a strategy that has the ambition of being more or less all-encompassing in terms of digital development for a country can't embrace everything at the same time, especially if you link it up with an action plan. And so we try to identify key objective areas, and you will see that on the second slide, the types of aspects. I'm not sure whether it's too small where you can see it from where you are, but we wanted to focus basically on 8 key target areas that were going to be challenges for us going forward for the next year or 2, maybe 3, because I think the other aspect that is very important in the strategy is that I think we have given up any hopes or any illusions that you can develop such a strategy and then have it cast in stone for, I don't know, 3, 4, or even a longer 3, 4 years or even a longer period. That's not working anymore. It doesn't work overall for society with the digital phenomenon. It doesn't work for government. We've experiencing that ourselves. We have to be much more nimble, much more flexible. And so I think the thought of a strategy that was giving an overall frame to society per se, but in a sense that is all-encompassing. This is not a top-down strategy. It's bottom-up, and of course has elements also where the government bears responsibilities, because we clearly found out that whilst we want to seize the opportunities, whilst we want to give freedom to digitization, we also clearly need a framework, an overall framework, and that's what citizens in Switzerland expect from us, which gives them security and trust as well. I think to have developed trust in digital technologies, to develop trust and confidence in using these new tools is a prerequisite for seizing opportunities. And I think the time where you can simply say we'll put everything out in the market with no regulations, absolutely no strings attached, I don't think this is a viable solution for the long term. We do recognize that space has to be given to digital also experiments, I think at different levels, but at the same time there is clearly a case for leadership, for political leadership, but for a leadership that is listening and that is engaging and that develops the strategy in a multi-stakeholder way. And that's sort of the DNA of our strategy that you see in a sort of more symbolic way presented here with the key action areas, but then of course also clearly reflecting the stakeholders groups that we are engaging with on a day-by-day basis. And so if, I don't have the time to go into detail with regard to substance. Certainly for us, the entire issue of data, usage of data, big data going forward was a new key component. But I think the other very central element of the strategy is the dialogue. I mentioned that we can't do strategies for 4 years or longer. So the dialogue has to be permanent. And what we have seen, of course, before the strategy was adopted by the government, but certainly also since then, is I would say, an encouraging level of increasing engagement by stakeholders. We are, of course, aware that a number of stakeholders are not yet there. They haven't maybe recognized the challenges or the opportunities that are around the corner for them. But we see in Switzerland also at the decentralized level, of course, also amongst the different stakeholders groups, and it's quite clear that our very highly ranked universities that we have in Switzerland, especially also the technical universities, have been precursors for that a long time ago. But those players will be playing an instrumental part in our strategy as well, which again should be something which is an alive strategy, something that the government regularly, in rather frequent rhythms, looks at. And what we did now in November 2016, I mentioned this national conference earlier, we gathered the most relevant stakeholders, the stakeholders we had been in contact with, the stakeholders that were known to us, that had made themselves known, that were coming forward to be engaged in this process. And we took stock of where the strategy stood after only 18 months, which for us is a relatively short time. And the idea is that with this stock taking, which of course is only a point of culmination of a lot of dialogues, a lot of discussions, a lot of actions, also a lot of initiatives like the one we're going to hear about from Mr. Bugno in a minute had come about, but we wanted to have a better grasp on what is really going on, what has happened in 18 months, and what does it mean for the reshaping of this digital strategy by the government. So what we are now going to do in 2019 is structure all the input and the output and all the also expressions of areas that need to be developed more in digitization, put that to the government with a view of reworking the strategy, and so forth. So this is not a one-off exercise we're doing. This is something that we're going to do in a repetitive way, and which, of course, could very well lead also to a completely new framework at some stage if we find out that with the strategy we have, we're no longer on the right track. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to tell you in terms of where we're coming from, why do we have such a strategy, what is in its DNA, and what do we want to achieve in the future. And I would then be happy to engage in the discussion later on and give the floor back to you, Mr. Beglinger.
Thank you very much, Philippe Metzger. Before you go on, just so let us keep in mind, so we have a strategy. This strategy is not cast in stone. It needs evolvement. It's a multi-stakeholder strategy in the sense that there was a dialogue in developing it and also taking care of possibly all possible actors and aspects. And now let's have a look at one particular aspect, the aspect of the entrepreneurial spirit in that. And for this, I welcome Edouard Bugnon. Edouard Bugnon is Vice President of the EPFL in Lausanne. At earlier time, he was in a real high-tech environment. He was in the US, one of the founders of VMware, and after that VP, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Cisco, well-known company. 5 years ago, he came back to Switzerland and is now trying to make sure that the ivory tower in Lausanne and entrepreneurial spirit comes together to the benefit of this country and to other countries as well. Thank you very much, Edouard.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how many ivory towers we have in Switzerland in academia, but I don't think there's actually one in Lausanne. We're actually very connected to the real world, to technology transfer and innovation. I won't speak for the other institutions. I'm here representing the other Digital Switzerland. I think that just to avoid any confusion, there actually are two Digital Switzerland. There is a strategy by the government, which Mr. Metzger represents, and then there is a nonprofit association called, to avoid and to create confusion, Digital Switzerland. And I actually represent the association, Digital Switzerland, not the government strategy. The association obviously advises the government on its own Digital Switzerland strategy. So if we go to the next slide, what you basically see are the current members of the association, Digital Switzerland. I represent EPFL, that's where I work. This basically has the who's who of the civil society in Switzerland. It includes companies, it includes Swiss companies, companies headquartered in Switzerland, foreign companies that have a substantial R&D presence in Switzerland or have a substantial business in Switzerland. It includes a lot of the academic partners and institutions, the medical institutions, and the key humanitarian stakeholders that are based in Switzerland. If you are part of civil society based in Switzerland and your employer is not represented here, you can always talk to us after this session. Our mission is, if we go to the next slide, our mission is around four observations. The first one is we have observed the need to rethink and strengthen the Swiss economy in the context of this new reality. And what does this new reality mean? I think maybe one way to look at this is Switzerland is known for a number of things, and one of them are the boundary conditions that we provide for independent business and private business. It is the political stability, it is the economic stability, it is the administrative efficiency that we provide to our constituents and to our companies. And these border conditions, these Rahmenbedingungen in German, were largely developed in a world where digitization as we understand it today did not exist. And so one of the challenges is to strengthen the Swiss economy in the context of the development of these new boundary conditions, some of which may be formalized by us, some of which, and this is actually one of the most challenging aspects of this, are actually formalized or developed de facto by others in a highly multi-stakeholder environment. Digital Switzerland itself is a nationwide initiative. We have a presence in all substantial geographic portions of Switzerland. EPFL is on the steering committee of the national initiative and is also deeply involved on the French-speaking side of the initiative. This is not limited or tied to any particular vertical or area of interest. In fact, one of the things that we see is the opportunity to bring together players who would not normally talk to each other, who are effectively brought together because of this digital transformation. And I think this is one of the fundamental themes is creativity will come out and disruption will emerge as a result of digitization. It's very, very important to have people who would not imagine they have anything to do with each other to actually revisit and challenge that position in light of digitization. And then the last one is to create a little bit of leverage and to be united and to make this transformation. If we go to the next slide. The way we sort of have organized our association and our initiatives is around these 5 pillars, and I'll go through them one by one. The political framework needs to change. We have a system of semi-direct democracy that many countries in the world envy, that is premised on having a very deep and constant interaction between the citizen and the people, that used to be done through effectively proximity mechanisms. And as we know, digitization is impacting democracy. It's been proven in many countries that outside forces can actually influence the democratic process. And this is one of the examples of sort of the threat to, or the impact of digitization on our way of life. There is a substantial effort going into the education aspect. We need to train and retrain our workforce, not just students and young adults, which is the primary business of my institution, but also throughout their lives, which is why EPFL is now starting, for example, an extension school to retrain the current workforce in the context of these new technologies. Digitization is a huge opportunity. There's tremendous amount of innovation and technology transfer in Switzerland, and there is a focus on accelerating startups and enabling startups in the digital world. Many of these startups around the world have emerged because of the digital and the digitization opportunity, and so the support for startups is to leverage this opportunity. I'll skip the thought leadership because this is one of the most interesting one, and I actually have a slide on this later. And lastly, we're involved in a lot of the public communication. Because we're a system and a society of semi-direct democracy, it is very important that we communicate broadly about the theme. This is not something that can be imposed top-down. It has to basically be broadly understood, which is why we're involved in a number of initiatives. And there was actually a very important event for those of you who are not in Switzerland in November after the Digital Day, where the initiative of the government was presented, which was really one about explaining to the people some of the opportunities associated with digitization. If we go to the next slide, I want to show you one example of one of those thought leadership challenges that we have run as Digital Switzerland. And you know, this is viewed as sort of an example of what we can do and what our mission is as an association, bringing together different stakeholders. And it's around the idea of blockchain. And basically, we ran a workshop, and the idea with this workshop is to basically see how blockchain can actually help business. Blockchain is actually one of those fundamental enabling technologies, which forces us to rethink what we mean by transparency, privacy, confidentiality, and integrity of data processing. Things that are concepts that are typically not formalized in either in law or in the administrative framework. But it's a tremendous opportunity for efficiency in the interaction between businesses or between businesses and the administration. And if you actually look at the stakeholders in that workshop, we have people representing the technology space, representing the commercial carriers, the Swiss commercial carrier, as well as the commercial registry offices of 3 of our cantons in Switzerland. And it's an example of basically bringing people who would not otherwise spontaneously work with each other on a particular key technology. And then the other example, again, one of those challenges that we run is in the area of health. Switzerland is a country that takes privacy extremely seriously. And so where the notion of the transportation of medical data is something that is very sensitive politically, but it's also one that is potentially foundational for a number of key innovation in medical breakthroughs and practices if it's done well. And so this is another example of putting together stakeholders that may or may not work spontaneously with each other. Some of them may actually have adversarial goals or objectives. And this is a very, very broad list that have looked together at a particular idea, which is to basically see how does it actually make sense to share data in a privacy-conscious way, in a secure way, in a particular for a particular disease, which in this case is hypertension. And then my last point on the next slide is just to give a little bit of color on one of the big initiatives of the association. It was on November 21st, so the day after the federal government's digital strategy was launched. And this was an event that basically was done in train stations and in trains, which is the core pipe that connects Switzerland together. Involved 3 of our federal councillors and to substantial success and media coverage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edouard Bugnon. So let us be clear. So we have a government strategy, and at the same time, we have also some kind of a private strategy. Whether this is all-encompassing or just taking into account 80% of the industry or civil society and so on, doesn't matter. But there are some kind of friendly, competing strategies, which is probably typical also growing in the context of how Switzerland ticks, which is that there is top-down, yes, as in every state, but there is also bottom-up, and it's a powerful bottom-up. And while trying to bring things together, this is the challenge for Switzerland, but I think everybody is convinced that this is one of the ways how to bring things in a peaceful way further. So it's not industrial policy, it is maybe guidance from above, but it's also a push from below. Now, if this were not enough, Switzerland is a confederate state. Now, what are these little republics? For example, the Republic of Geneva, thinking to all that. Republic of Geneva, which has its own constitution, also thinks that it needs a say on a lower local level. And on that, we will hear Alexander Barclay. Alexander Barclay, just in brief, he was trained in St. Gallen, the Norwegian School of Economics, at Sciences Po in France, and the London School of Economics. He built and ran a tech startup after university. Then he worked for the General Secretariat of the Swiss Federal Finance Department, and now he is working for the Canton of Geneva on its digital policy at the Geneva Lab. He also conducts research at the University of St. Gall and teaches at Sciences Po in Paris. Now, Alexander, tell us, where is room, after this already existing, two initiatives for a cantonal one? And you must know that in Switzerland we have 26 cantons, which each may have their own digital strategy of their own. Well, we'll talk about later whether this is a really good thing. Well, this can be managed, or whether there even needs to be manageable. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jacques. Just by show of hands, out of curiosity, how many people in the room are from outside of Switzerland? Just to get a sense of, okay, so you're getting a good idea of how Switzerland works for this panel today. So, good afternoon to all. My name is Alexander Barclay. I'm a member of the Genève Lab, and as such, I work for the state of Geneva, so the canton of Geneva. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank, naturally, Lorenzo and Philip, who've organized this panel today, to invite the Genève Lab and the state of Geneva to come and present today. We're very glad to be here. So, Jacques has just mentioned a few words about Swiss federalism. I'd like to add a few points. So, Geneva is one of the 26 states of Switzerland, which we call cantons. You currently are in the canton of Geneva, so congratulations and welcome. This canton is about 500,000 people, nearly 500,000 people, out of the, I believe, 8.4 million inhabitants of the country. Now, in the Swiss federal system, the cantons have a lot of responsibilities that are very directly in link and in interaction with the citizens. For instance, in the field of education, in the field of social services, in the field of police and security, land planning, and so on. We can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as we've seen, digitalization is by nature transverse. It touches all state activities, many fields, many areas of our life. And now recognizing that digitalization is not just a topic for one department. It's not just a topic for the information technology department, but it's for all areas of the state. So the state of Geneva decided to create this unit, this living lab, this digital innovation team, to support all of the administration's digital transformation, and that was in October 2016, the Genève Lab under the leadership of State Councillor Pierre Maudet. Now, it is naturally an unusual team for a public administration in Switzerland. There are similar teams in other countries, and we do look to the UK, to Denmark, to France, to Finland for similar models. we are members of a European network of living labs to share best practices. Now, the task of accompanying the digital transformation of a public administration sounds very big, doesn't it? Especially for a team of 5 people within an administration of thousands. So how do we do it? And we can go on to the next slide. Before explaining how we do it, I just want to share this definition with you on digital. What do we mean when we say digital? This definition was proposed by Tom Loosemore, the founder of the Government Digital Service of the UK. So digital is applying the culture, practices, processes, technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. We'll surely discuss it right afterwards. In any case here, the idea is to go beyond sheer technology and also its impact on culture, practices and processes. And we can go on to the next slide. So what do we mean when we say a living lab? So a living lab is an organization that is user-centered, that is based on an open innovation ecosystem, and uses systematic user co-creation to prototype extremely fast solutions, building on different disciplines. The appropriate methods we're referring to here on this slide are mainly design thinking, and we work with an existing ecosystem on a local, national, and international level, including this European network. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, so who are our clients? A public administration is here to serve the citizens as well as the companies present on the territory. Now, in our case, we serve internally. Our clients are project managers, civil servants within the administration. We are their sidekick. We're here to help them do terrific projects that really help citizens. So we have 5 key elements in our offering. The first one is events. We organize events where we gather senior civil servants to present emerging technologies and use cases in our administration. In our hub dimension, our key value is to basically link project managers to the skills or organizations they might profit from. So that can be a startup, that can be someone else within the administration that is working on a similar issue. So it's essentially matchmaking, organizing events, hackathons, challenges. Raising awareness includes trainings that we provide for senior officials, such as design thinking, introductory courses. And exploration and experimentation, we basically work on emerging technologies with groups throughout the ministries to say, for instance, chatbots, what can we do, what is the potential, what are the risks, and what can we very quickly explore and then move on to an experimentation stage to build a proof of concept. Now, these are nice words. If we move on to the next slide, I can mention 4 recent projects that are ongoing. So the first one is the State of Geneva provides a platform where any citizen can connect and upload their tax declaration, for instance. So that's the biggest use case, is uploading your tax declaration, okay? You can naturally get other documents from it, but that's the one people know the most. And there, the main issue is how do you ensure that every citizen receives such an account and actually uses it? So we're working with the team responsible for that on exploring solutions in that regard. The second case, the tax authority, I'm sorry, I'm going back to taxes again, but it's an important issue for a state, as we all know. The tax authority came to us and said, look, the Generation Z, so people born after 2000, are soon going to be in age to pay taxes, and we don't know quite how to address them. How should we first reach out to them? And naturally, as an administration, the main idea intuitively would be, well, social media. So we organized a workshop with young people and discussed that. And interestingly, social media are not the right channel to reach out to these people. If you're interested in that, we can discuss it later on. A third example, the blockchain experimentation. So here I'd like to mention as well that the State of Geneva is also a member of Digital Switzerland, which Mr. Bugnon presented just before. So they are industry, so large groups, but there also are cantons that are members of Digital Switzerland. Blockchain experimentation with the commercial registry. And lastly, on a broader and more strategic level, and here I'm reacting to the question of Jacques, the State of Geneva is developing its own digital strategy. And we can go on to the next one. So why? Well, every ministry, every office develops its own strategy, works on their own field of competency, and that includes necessarily issues linked to digitalization. Now, the decision was made that beyond the one common IT, so information technology, e-government strategy that the State of Geneva has, there is the will, the political will, to have a digital strategy that aligns the key principles used by all these different strategies concerned with digitalization. So it's basically recognizing the need for transversality in digital matters and to define shared principles and a shared vision of where the State of Geneva wants to go in terms of digital technology. Now, this is an ongoing project. I can't present yet the vision because we are currently working on it. We're working on it with universities, with the technical schools present in Geneva. So the idea is naturally to open up the doors and consult broadly. In fact, we're going to conduct an online consultation in the beginning of next year, and so we'd be glad to count on any person that is interested in participating. We are currently working to perhaps feed the discussion that's going to go on afterwards on around 5 key roles that the State of Geneva sees it has to play in regard to digital transformation, and those are issues around education, lifelong learning also, protection, regulation, promotion, and facilitation. Okay, this is all I'll say for now. Perhaps just the last slide is to say thank you very much. If you're interested in following up on what our team does, we are present on social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Now we've heard, so there is not a real lack of strategies in Switzerland. But the strategy itself doesn't make necessarily already the world better. And you here in Europe, you're in Geneva, you're in Switzerland, you are society, so you have to live with whatever comes out. With that, thankfully, we have Roxana Radu here on the panel as well to maybe summarize how society in Switzerland should feel about these strategies. Are they good enough? A few words on her background. Roxana Radu is a program manager at the Geneva Internet Platform, GIP, and Internet Governance Associate at Diplo Foundation. She's a member of the board and currently, it is important, the chair of Internet Society's Switzerland chapter. Her research and publications focus on international governance and global internet policy making, and she has received a PhD with honors, I heard, in international relations, political science from the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies. Her research publications focus on international governance and global internet policy making. So, Roxana, can such an open strategy make digital disruption socially acceptable? Or would the state have to invest much more actively in programs and just bundle everything in a decent top-down approach?
Thank you very much, first, for inviting me to be on this panel representing the civil society. So as you heard, I am working also in the international environment, so I will try to give a perspective that combines the national developments in Switzerland and a bit of an outlook of international developments. I'm here representing Internet Society Switzerland today. We are a non-for-profit, non-governmental association founded in 2012. And we are working at the national level on anything that has to do with promoting, researching, and contributing to the evolution of the internet. We have an open membership and generally multi-stakeholder. A lot of our members represent the technical sector, and that is not surprising given the excellent schools we have in Switzerland for that. But also about 30% of the members working in other fields that are non-technical, and that allows us to have a very good overview of everything that is of concern at different levels in Switzerland. With that, I would like to just move quickly to some of the points that are important for the strategy for us as civil society. First of all, the fact that this is an alive strategy, as Mr. Metzger pointed out, makes it easier for us to have the door open for constant communication. And I think this is really a key point. If we look at strategies elsewhere, it is not always that easy to create this continuous dialogue, and we greatly appreciate that. Secondly, I think one key point for us is the safeguards that are in place. Of course, more and more is moving online, be it information, be it jobs, be it risks, everything is moving online. But here we have to be very cautious about providing a safety net for everyone to feel that their rights are not threatened in any way. And I think this is maybe the main challenge for the strategy, ensuring that throughout the next decade, the next 50 years, we are in a position to safeguard our digital rights, but also our offline rights. With an example, from the UK, you have seen probably the push against the data of patients being transferred to Google for automatic processing via artificial intelligence in the national health system in the UK. We would probably be very vocal against something like this happening in Switzerland. I think at the level of the strategy, we can already eliminate some of the concerns. So one thing that is relevant in this dialogue is to make sure that we also learn from the examples of other countries, and we don't end up doing things that are extremely contested. And maybe the third important aspect is one that I found quite innovative, namely the approach to technology as a life cycle. It is not that we are just consumers of technology, but that we can think about sustainable ways to consume technology, to make use of it, to explore the opportunities that technology provides. And here we relate the discussion also to e-waste, how much of our devices become redundant after just a few months in some cases, after a year or two in most cases, how we can think about having this in a sustainable way. In France, there is already a law against technological obsolescence and against redundancy, so manufacturers need to declare in advance the lifespan of their devices. This doesn't exist in Switzerland yet, but it's definitely one point for discussion in the near future. And this is also where we learn from other countries, and we can probably implement some of the things that we find useful from other experiences. When it comes to whether this digital strategy makes the digital disruption more acceptable for society, it is definitely something that can no longer be very clearly divided. There is a digital disruption, there is also a societal disruption, and the two are probably going hand in hand. There is probably the need for having now maybe the most important dialogue of all in the near future, namely what kind of society we need to live in and we want to live in. Many things are happening to us. Technology is evolving very, very fast, but can we have the time and the space to sit down and discuss where we want to be in 5 years from now? A lot of people that I talk to tell me, look, this is happening too fast. I don't even have time to think about what artificial intelligence means for my daily use of the computer. What does it mean? How is my data being processed in that? And I think what we as civil society would definitely be in favor of is just having this space to discuss the values, also the ethical values of the society we want to live in. At the Internet Society Switzerland, we started such an initiative. We are running a set of workshops over the next 2 years called the Values of Internet Technologies, where everyone is invited to openly speak about what the concerns are, how we can ensure that some of the principles that made the Internet the great innovation that it is can be maintained in this era of monopoly. It's also a question of what we want to prioritize in our engagement online. So if you are based here and you'd like to participate in this, approach me after the session. I can give you more details about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roxana. May I just pass on the ball to Philipp Metzger? So what I heard from Roxana is that it's probably not enough what we are doing here. They're disruptive technologies. Everything's happy with it. Is it that the Swiss regulator is just lazy in not doing more, or is this something that should happen? Well, that is just the Swiss way of how we approach things. I hear also a hand raised over there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's of course the that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, how do you approach this from a governance perspective? I have still in my mind, I was on a panel a year and a half ago, and I was challenged by the fact that we even that the government even adopted such a strategy. I think the very eminent professor said that he was actually shocked that there was a strategy by the government for digitization. And his point of view was that basically things happen well, they work well in Switzerland because government keeps its hands out of it, lets everything take its course, and then things will fall into place quite rightly. And I think, as I think I've hinted at that initially, I don't think that is a viable option going forward. I think there is expectations by the citizens that there is a stability around them. Of course, digitization offers quite a lot of instability on many levels, and that's something we are grappling with and we have to get better at in dealing with. Of course, it starts often with the mental attitude towards it. I mean, how open are you to that, and how much are you willing to engage in challenges? But I think we also, if you talk about leadership, ultimately it's about leadership in the digital space and the digital life. I think you can't dissociate it from the governance DNA that you have. And for those who know Switzerland, this is not a country which has a strong top-down leadership. This is a collective leadership. There is a lot of engagement between the stakeholders, between the federal levels, but also, of course, with the population directly through the direct democracy. And I don't think it would be really promising to try now with this revolution that is happening at a scale that we've never seen before, now to try and change our own DNA, how we operate, and turn everything upside down and say, we now are going to nominate a digital czar, let's say, in the Swiss government, and everything will fall into place. I know that there are other countries that are either taking a more top-down stance, that are regulating more heavily a number of aspects of the digital phenomenon than here. But I think ultimately we will have to find a solution that reflects also our own DNA. I'm not saying by that we don't have to change a number of aspects. And of course we have slow pace, which is a challenge when it comes to legislation, for instance. But I think the leadership challenge that we have ahead of us is certainly something that we're trying to approach gradually and not with a big bang.
Do you agree or disagree?
Mostly I agree, but I'm afraid that there is a case or risk for obsolescence. This is the question I have. One can make a case for the fact that national identities and democracy are under the threat of large groups like Facebook and Google. They develop sense of communities that go beyond or are not within the national identity idea of communities. How concerned are you that external forces might be manipulating citizens of Switzerland by pursuing their own agenda, like we've seen in the United States during the American elections? And what measures can be taken, or what measures are taken in order to prevent that being a major factor on the dissolution of a local identity?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, this is a key question for the functioning of our political system, and of course we have identified a number of those phenomena. We've also looked at more specifically at the the whole impact of social media and what it would require in terms of legal basis, legislation, and the framework that applies to it. We've certainly found that there are a number of laws and rules already in place that actually, if they're applied properly, and of course if they can also be applied across the border, because often we have issues, phenomena of cross-border nature here, then this will significantly stabilize the environment in which we're in. But of course, especially in a direct democracy where the population votes 4 times a year typically on a number of issues of substance, the information and objective information and a variety and a pluralism is particularly important. And I think that that point or that key component of our political system is very well recognized. And I don't think we're at the point now where we would have to fear that from one day to the other the entire decision-making and decision-shaping collapses. But we need certainly firm pillars that we need to maintain or even maybe create in the future. I think there is a case also of engaging, of asking yourself the question how you're engaging, especially also young citizens, through new means in the political process, because they use different tools. They're not really anymore operating the same way as we or maybe our ancestors did. So I think there's maybe also a bit of a potential there to experiment maybe sometimes at the local level, because that's often what we do. We have pilot cases, for instance, at the municipal or a cantonal level for certain digital processes when it comes to interaction between the citizen and the state. At the same time, I think we will have to look well after our, I would say, very diverse media landscape as well, and also a landscape where we keep the balance so that minorities, be that linguistic, be that cultural minorities, also get a healthy degree of the information that they need to make up their minds. So in that sense, I think we're relatively stable. We have recognized a number of challenges, and of course we are challenged also when it comes to the media system. You may know there will be a referendum about that in March. And so I think that's what we're doing. We're looking at those things, we're working at them continuously, and we're trying to make sure to preserve stability for the decision-making process in the direct democracy on the one hand, and at the same time, I think we will try to look out for more modern ways of engaging through digital means with the citizens. But that, of course, is also a very big challenge. We see debates on e-voting, for instance, and that is typically something that I referred to earlier. I mean, the Swiss are not always the ones who throw everything overboard they know and jump onto a new technology.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe just add a few words. Mr. Metzger, obviously being part of the administration, is representing, I think, a view that an optimistic view, a realistic view of the system. I want to just add a little bit. I'm not disagreeing with him, but I want to add a little bit of color purely from a strictly speaking technical perspective. If I had been told a year ago the level of manipulation and the impact that that manipulation has had and the technical means by which that manipulation has occurred in much bigger democracies than Switzerland, I would not have believed it. I would have thought that this was a constructed scenario from some bad movie. Right? The reality is we have evidence in other countries of extremely sophisticated forms of manipulation using platforms that are never under the jurisdiction of our own country. Right? And one of the challenges that we have here, to be blunt, is that the platforms that are used to shape the people's opinions are not under Swiss jurisdiction. And even when they are under the same jurisdiction as the country involved, which is obviously the United States, it is still extremely challenging to identify the root cause of the problem. If you go back to the issue of the manipulation, the Russian manipulation, and the way Facebook was used and abused and misused in the prior election, you'll realize how hard it is even for the Americans to get to the bottom of this issue. The same thing could happen to us, we will never know. And this is, I think, the biggest concern that we have, where we need, and I'm purely looking at this is purely a scientific engineering view of the facts that have been explained to me and as I understand them, is this is something that we did not, as scientists, as engineers, anticipate. And I'm looking at it purely as a technical question. It has nothing to do with the substance of the issue. The set of questions that we will have that are surprising to scientists and engineers, that actually are impacting our daily lives as citizens and human beings, is a recurring theme, which is something we as scientists are not used to having and seeing. Right? When you're looking at this from a scientific perspective or an engineering perspective, whatever you do in the lab has no impact on society for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And now what we're seeing is things that are barely understood in the scientific community that have an immediate impact on our societies.
Very briefly, and then Alexander Barkley, because in Geneva with e-voting, you're quite advanced. And what is your view on e-voting, having heard what Eva Bugnion just said?
Just 2 points in addition to what Mr. Bugnion just said. I think we were all surprised indeed, at the degree and the depth of the manipulation of the public opinion that we have experienced at the global scale recently. And I'd just like to point out 2 maybe concrete measures or 2 concrete also projects that are close to our heart precisely for that reason. The first, I've hinted at it before, we need to get better with enforcement across jurisdictions. I think this is a major challenge for the digital space. It's not a coincidence that Switzerland has been one of the initial supporters of the Internet Jurisdiction project from early on. There will be another conference in Ottawa next year. And I think that is an absolutely fundamental challenge we have to work at together at the international level, cross-border enforcement of our laws. And the second point, of course, there are much bigger democracies, there are much bigger countries, there are much bigger corporations that we have in Switzerland, and that's why we believe we can't just, create a protectionist system. I mean, protection is maybe not the right word in this context, but a system where we can just keep that everything out. We want to have an open and connected Switzerland, but I think we look at the diversity of also the media system, how the opinion is informed and formed. And that's why we also believe, and the government of Switzerland believe, that it's important that we maintain trusted sources of information. And part of those trusted sources of information is in our system, the public broadcasting system, which is now the object of this referendum on the 4th of March. Just those 2 very concrete elements in the challenges that we're facing when it comes to democracy and the processes for information of citizens.
Alexander Barkley, do you still dare having e-voting? Do you still dare organizing e-voting in Geneva after these threats?
That's a very big question, and it's a question that can be addressed to the federal level as well. I think the solution chosen by the Canton of Geneva in developing its own e-voting solution was to work with actors, competent actors locally, as well as putting large amounts of the code available on GitHub to allow people around the world who are interested by the topic and who are knowledgeable to audit the code and propose improvements to that solution.
Thank you. There was a question from the floor.
My name is Raymond Morel.
Bit closer to the microphone.
Yes, my name is Raymond Morel. I am very happy to see that you speed up a bit, because yes, but I can't take it because I think, as Albert Jacquard said in the past, to be efficient, efficiency is an underproduct of lucidity. Okay? And I can't imagine to have a living lab only 9 years after the first experiment. I know that to have a baby you need 9 months, to have an elephant 22 months, but to have a living lab you need 9 years in Geneva. but I am happy that you will have a second one, okay? And nowadays, everybody say, oh, we need to introduce informatics in gymnasium and so on and so on. But in '86, it was already done. Sorry. And in '94, Mrs. Dreyfus killed it by introducing the new ORM, MRV, in German. And now we are a bit stressed to introduce something because it's a difficult position. I think you mean that it's a dynamic plan. I am not sure and not convinced that you can be successful. I don't speak about EPFL, but in the general level of Switzerland and the Swiss society, because there are some big holes in your plan. And I offer to organize one day on that to improve and to give better possibility to be successful in the future.
I take it there is no direct question associated with. So I would like to ask one last question to Edouard Bugnon. And this question just goes in a slightly different direction, which is, do you think we are on the right way right now with this strategy to really make the digitalization happen in Switzerland in a way it should, and to prepare not only companies but also society?
So, I mean, first of all, this is a global, worldwide challenge. It's like asking whether the Swiss strategy on global warming is successful, right? I mean, we can have our strategy. It remains a very hard problem. The societal impacts are deep. We are better prepared than most to handle them. So my experience is informed by the 18 years I spent in the center of the universe when it comes to digitization in the middle of Silicon Valley, which is actually an island in the state of California, which itself is an island in the United States of America, in which people have constructed a world that is actually very decoupled from the broader society, right? And where people have created innovation, created disruption, have also, I think they're deeply thinking about the impact of their own creations, right? I don't think people are naive about it, but I think it's very clear that the technology innovation is ahead of the ability for society to digest its side effects and impact. That is because this temporal dimension is atypically short, right? Society has always been able to adjust with very massive disruptions, but usually these disruptions take one full generation to have an impact on a global scale, and now we're down to a handful of years at most. And I think that's probably the area that is most significant. The need to have a multi-stakeholder answer, I think, is becoming very clear. For those of you who were in this building, actually the building next door, who heard Brad Smith talk about the Digital Geneva Conventions a few weeks ago, the need for a multi-stakeholder framework to regulate cyberspace the way we have a framework to regulate the space, the physical, the actual space, or land, or sea, or air, is very clear. And it's a very hard legal problem. And then when it comes to education, it's extremely, we're going to go through a level of disruption and transformation that in a way is similar to what mechanization has done 100 years ago in the primary sector. We're going to have the same level of transformation for a lot of white-collar jobs. And obviously, it's a huge challenge. And this is where I go back to just the scientific breakthroughs. The scientists themselves that are looking at this, that are closest to their own inventions, are surprised sometimes by A, how well it works, and B, how little they understand why it even works. Right? And I think this is where we're a little puzzled right now. It's one thing to, as an engineer, to build a machine and being very proud of the fact that, hey, the machine works and it's efficient. But it's rare that an engineer will say, I've built this machine, it's super efficient, and I don't really understand why it works that well. And we're exactly at this juncture right now in an area we have not talked about, which is what people call machine learning or artificial intelligence or data science, which is the ability for machines to develop insights in a way better than humans can actually develop insights.
Thank you very much. May I just conclude this panel, this open forum, which is of course a little bit short, with asking each of the panelists a very short question. The question is, should we be afraid of the situation we will have in 20 years' time from now? Philipp Metzger.
Why is it always me first? Well, I'm going to say no, and I'm sure somebody will say yes, so I'm looking forward to that.
So I will actually also say no, because I think we have to be afraid of other things first.
We cannot really run away from progress, but I think we need the right safeguards in place. So as long as we ensure that we are looking at a bright future.
I'll say no as well. We don't have to be afraid. We have to be confident and work together.
So thank you very much to the panel for having discussed with us. Oh, there's a last. There are two hands raised, which I think we will listen, and then I think we have to close just for time.
Yes, okay, thank you. My name is Saliu Mansare. I'm from Sierra Leone. I came in here to follow up on what you're doing in terms of a multi-stakeholder approach. We also we are at the very, very early stages. There's a lot of similarities between Sierra Leone and Switzerland, many. But we're looking at what you're doing and how you're learning through this process. But I think just from the last statements, I gathered that there is a lot of loopholes that you guys have to go through. And I think where you've fallen, I think we will learn from. But it's frightening that you guys are so afraid, and where will we be? But anyway, thanks very much.
I'll just be super quick. I think the huge opportunity for countries like Sierra Leone and others is that you do not have the infrastructure and the legacy infrastructure that some societies and some industries have. The ability to skip a few technological generations is a huge opportunity for you.
There was also a hand raised behind.
Yes. Yes. I'm Buba from Cameroon, member of IGF Secretariat, National IGF Secretariat. I would like to know how the different strategies were developed. Is it developed in separate cantons, like Geneva and the other cantons, or under the Confederation vision, or it is completely different? Each canton has its own strategy. And then how do you follow up the implementation? Thank you.
Well, may I just very briefly pass on this question to Philipp Metzger and in particular to Alexander Barkley.
Of course. First. Well, I mean, the strategy that I briefly described is we call it an umbrella strategy, which is really at a high level, and we have as components of that strategy. We even have at the federal level we have other sectoral strategy, let's say, specific strategies for critical infrastructure, for dealing with cyber risks, for e-government and the like. And so our strategy, of course, is not prescriptive in the sense that it will tell everyone, even at the federal level, what to do on all the aspects of digitization. And likewise, and that's, I think, where Mr. Barkley will come in, we don't prevent cantons from adopting their own strategies that are adapted to their own purposes, and I think the cantons won't do that either for the municipalities, but I think Mr. Barkley can briefly elaborate on that.
Sure. So the Swiss federal system is built in such a way that all the cantons operate within the framework and the laws of the federal state. Beyond that, each canton then develops its own strategies, and there are very different strategies for cultural and historical reasons in all fields, and to a certain extent that is the notion of Swiss federalism as a laboratory, where every canton has its own lab, and something that works well may then be replicated in other cantons. So the digital strategy of the canton of Geneva operates within the general framework, of the federal digital strategy, and we adapt it to our local particularities and the local players as well.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Oh, no, but that's the really last one. Yeah.
Yes, ça marche. Hello, my name is Mohamed. I'm coming from France, and from an external point of view, I heard you speak about ethics and digital rights. So the question is, Switzerland is a country where you have the biggest financial flow in the world. This is the first point. And the second point is that you have among the smartest company who explore the data and who make predictive analysis. For example, Palantir Technology. The question is, how can you guarantee the privacy of the data when you have, at the same time, the biggest money and the biggest system who can make prediction and pattern? Thank you.
So, I mean, I'll give you the scientific answer, right?
Scientific.
Data privacy and privacy-preserving computation is only possible through mathematics, right? In the same way that security of communication is only possible through mathematics, and the form of mathematics is called cryptography, right? So it's very well understood today that you can create a secure communication channel, and it can only be secure if it's done through mathematics. The same is also possible for privacy-preserving computation through mathematics. It's a different form of cryptography. I won't go into the details. It's at the very cusp of what we scientifically know what to do and how to operate, right? So it's kind of an emerging technology. Anything that is basically manipulating raw data, you have to trust the person that is doing the data and processing the data on your behalf. And that is the reality that 99% of the processing is today.
So thank you very much. I think we are at the end of the panel. Some of us have to leave. I thank you very much for discussing with us. Have a good continuation of the IGF, and we'll leave for lunch now. Thank you very much, everybody.
Prochaine fois avec les tampons auriculaires. Oui, exactement. On va à un café, non? Un café, je peux pas. On prend 2 minutes en sortant. Merci. C'est